Everybody, welcome to week 178. So how would Captain Kirk say Starlog, week 178?
Start date 5242.6. I mean, I don't actually know. Like, they're probably, hold on a second. I'll have the answer to that in a second.
I thought about that this morning. I thought, we need to ask, how would Captain Kirk say week 178? Oh, yeah, ask ChatGPT.
See, he just made that up, and but those of us that are nerdy enough know that that's not even the right number of decimals. So,
here's a funny thing. Speaking of ChatGPT, as people are getting on here. So when you upload your book to Amazon,
Start date 47/6/34.44 is what my Star Trek Online Academy Fleet start date calculator would tell me.
It's a real thing. I like it. It's good
Although
to
the
have
next
friends.
generation start date is 77/168.9.
Uh-oh.
Who knows?
Which one is right? It's kind of like the battle between different AI platforms, I guess. But here's a funny thing. One of the questions on Amazon when you upload your book is, did you use any artificial intelligence or ChatGPT to write your book? And I could honestly say, no, I wrote it myself. But anyway, I just thought that was really interesting. It's already making its way into books, evidently. Well, it makes sense. So we're going to be talking about Q4. Can you believe it? We are already here. I mean, dadgummit. And it's supposed to be cold this weekend. It's going to be 39 degrees as a low, or 38 in Lexington, where we're going to be this weekend. Crazy. So anyway, yeah, we're in October. Yeah, we're in the fourth quarter. So figured we'd do the Vince Lombardi. Gentlemen, this is a football. The fundamentals, and we have to be reminded, like, all right, so what should we be doing? What should we be looking for? What should we do to prepare so that we can finish 2023 strong and not be like Congress where you just go check out? All right. So any thoughts?
Yeah. I think it's just a reminder for everyone. I think given the dysfunction of the last week, the current tax rates that we are enjoying expire. 2026 new tax rates for the BGW clients and shoemaker clients, typical clients, which would be business owners. That means two extremely relevant items. One is, most of y'all gonna have probably between a 5 to 10% tax rate increase, even if you did nothing different. And that's through the expiration of the qualified business income tax deduction, plus a modest individual income tax rate increase. And then the second relevant piece of information is the estate tax exemption. The lifetime gift exemption goes down by 50% over what it is today. So if you have taxable estate, married filing jointly, it's round numbers, but roughly 12 million bucks or 24 million bucks, that's going to revert back to 12. So that 12 that you currently have as a freebie that you could be gifting now, suddenly going to be subject to 50% income tax. I mean, there's other stuff that goes into that, but that's nice round numbers. My only point in continuing to bring that up, besides just saying, hey, we ought to probably get out and vote, and get some reasonable people in there that can actually compromise, on both sides of the aisle, to get something fixed here. It's just that, look, dude, I mean, I think it's probably safe to assume that the answer is nobody's going to do a damn thing about that. It's just, if they can't agree, the default is it goes away. So it's it's not looking good on the road to agreement, Gary, even if it's a one-party system.
It's feeling like a uniparty system right now.
I know, like even then they can't agree. So who knows? It's a mystery.
Gosh. Yeah, I mean, it was funny. I was talking to somebody yesterday about the whole, oh yeah, crisis averted for 45 days. Oh, I know, it was Ken Glenn. And he goes, oh yeah, but it's going to be rearing its ugly head again. Yeah, that's true. And I mean, we could have a whole spiel on the dysfunction of what's going on there. I mean, it's just, but the thing that you mentioned, I think it was a week or so ago, Jack, was, all right, so if the government did shut down, all these yahoos that can vote in their own pay raises and that leave Congress as multi millionaires on their modest $200,000 a year salary. That's a mystery, isn't it? They were exempt. Oh, sorry, peasants. It's like, that is maddening.
Yeah, no, I think, I can't believe I'm saying this out loud, Jack, so don't post this on the Shoemaker YouTube site, but I watched the previews for the Napoleon movie that's coming out, and like the opening preview scene is Marie Antoinette getting her head chopped off. I'm like, yeah, that's how they did it back in the good old days for people who couldn't get grab done. We're going Game of Thrones style. You guys can't see Jack, but he's actually laughing at that. So anyway, Jack, tone
I
down.
am laughing. No, I am laughing, but I mean, yeah, no words needed. It's just they got it done. But yeah, it is hypocritical in that, but and we've said this, that people will make up their own stories or make the circumstances fit their reasoning, meaning that they're doing the most important work in the nation. It's not their fault that there is disagreement, and so it's not me, it's them kind of mentality.
Right.
And we've seen a lot of that over the past several days. And now, yes, in the House being in disarray, now you have people that, again, are even more self-interested in grabbing that power position rather than dealing with the issues. And you're right, 45 days is going to go by quickly because they're not paying attention to that. In fact, there are some others that say, well, okay, we've kicked that can down the road, so let's put that aside for a moment and let's deal with other issues now. So they have overtly said, let's deal with other issues rather than dealing with the one that we just averted a crisis of a shutdown. And so a little side personal note. So a couple of years ago, before McCarthy was Speaker of the House, and I should have tried to find this photo and post it, but I was sitting and so we were standing in front of Nancy Pelosi's suite, and the Speaker of the House's office in the Capitol building is huge. I mean, it's just a whole, like, it's the center part and it's just humongous. And then you have the leader of the minority party down the hall, still a nice office. And so Kevin was the leader of the Republican Party at that time, and Congress was not in session. We had a back tour, private tour essentially, and I have a picture sitting at Kevin's desk, kind of sitting there, and I wanted to grab the phone. I didn't want to put my fingerprints on anything, but I was like very tempted, to stage a photo. And it's very cool. You look out his window and you can see the Supreme Court out because it's on the corner and you could see all around. So it's very cool. But it was very clear the gamesmanship and everything else that goes on in there, and just to have another distraction. So I'm disappointed that happened. Without getting into the politics of it all, but I think it was just unfortunate that it happened, because now it's just another distraction and they're not going to get stuff done. They're going to be vying for power and then supporting the person that they think they're going to get favors from if that person gets into that seat. So anyway, a little bit.
I got to show you this
commentary.
picture. So you just said that because here's what's interesting. So this picture, that is the nuclear football.
Oh,
that is the office where 5 representatives of the armed services, the 5 individual guys before Space Force, but this is Commander Jake Johansson holding the nuclear football. and I held it. It's not that heavy, but they are crammed in this little room. They're the guys that have to be within 100 yards, I think, of the vice president at all times. And that nuclear football has to be within 100 yards of the vice president. Like, those guys crammed into a little office, and they're, that's a pretty important thing, not to diminish the Speaker of the House, but I mean, the palatial, like, seriously,
Yeah.
the discrepancy is interesting.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just, side note.
Yeah, I pulled you into that, so that's okay. My fault.
You did. Well, I know that you kind of being the Cliff Clavin of the trio, you probably have some interesting data or some reminders. Is that an accurate thing, or even checklist? I don't know.
Oh, you know me so well. I was thinking that for this week, I feel like more of an information aggregator. It's kind of like the reminder of things that you should be doing and maybe haven't done, or you're like, I'll get to it. And here we are, beginning of October. And the last time you kind of thought about it, it was April. And so just kind of, I was looking through, and what's interesting is as I was doing the research to kind of put together my thoughts, I was finding articles from 2015, 2018, 2019, and they all say the same thing. It's kind of, they say it in different ways, but it's kind of like so that's why I feel like today's conversation is more of a hey, we're your that we are that string on your pinky finger that today, to remind you, okay, you got to do some things potentially in the next several months in anticipation of next year, both looking back and kind of reflecting upon what you've done so far this year, looking back and comparing that to previous years, and looking at what your budget was, what your forecasts were, and then taking all that information and going prospectively into next year and into the following years. So a couple things that I found. Oh, and one thing I think was funny that I saw on one list, and only on one list, but it makes sense, is remove the small annoyances. So there's a lot of talk. There's talk in here, and you see declutter, literally, and not literally, in that. Excuse me. In that, okay, I look around in my office and like, yeah, I've been meaning to deal with that corner over there, kind of thing. But also, the mental kind of decluttering of things and the methods of kind of doing that. But when I saw this remove the small annoyances, it was akin to something that has been annoying me for a while that I just went ahead and fixed myself. So the person in my neighboring office, who both of you know, but I will not say his name, his door started squeaking. The hinges started squeaking. And every time he'd go in and out of his office, and I'm like, surely at some point he will go and either get the WD-40 himself or ask someone to go do it for him. And no, week after week after week. And then I found myself, why am I putting up with this? I'm trying to make a point as to, okay, who's going to break first, him or me? And I think it just became white noise to him. Or maybe it's a reminder that, okay, a mental note that he actually got up and went out of his office and then came back and sat back down because he hears that cringing noise, creeping noise. And so finally I said, this is stupid. So I removed the small annoyance. I found a can of WD-40 and I sprayed it up and fixed. And just, the mental nicety of not knowing every time he's in and out of his office kind of thing is helpful. So, but, more of the practical thing, some of the things we talked about is relationships, external and internal relationships. So start with the external ones, review your relationships with your vendors, with your customers, with, all the people that are on the outside of the bubble, literally outside of the office, that are part of your business. And so, and also review contracts. When we were talking about efficiencies, and supply chain and those kind of things in prior videos, it was, same as it was last year, but does it have to be? Are you losing efficiencies? Are there things that you can do to renegotiate a contract to save some things? But then also the internal, and I think the internal gets looked over a lot, passed over a lot, because it's, well, if I need to focus on something, it needs to be the external relationships, and it really should be focused on the internal relationships, because those are the key people that keep your business running. And I think there is a presumption, I see it all the time with clients and even here, that if no one's complaining overtly, or if it's not broke, then there's nothing to fix. But if you don't ask those questions, you'll find people that are not going to be overt and not going to want to confront and not want to be providing constructive criticism. And so you have to go and seek that and see what people are thinking, rather than assuming that everything's okay. And I think that that is one of the biggest failures of business culture, is that inward look does not occur. And you go into the next year and you're like, okay, well, I'll get to it eventually. We're going to have a firm retreat, or we'll do this, or we'll do that. And it just doesn't happen, or it just doesn't happen. It's very obvious that there wasn't a whole lot of intentionality put into it when you say, all right, let's meet for 2 hours and, go to somewhere and chat about a few things. And then the first hour is all social, and you have to spend 1 hour talking about business stuff. So anyway, so I'll start with that, with, kind of a review of the relationships, and see if you guys have stuff to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, you were kind of hit on some of the softer stuff. I mean, there's obviously the hard stuff, like hard not meaning like it's difficult to do, but more like tangible items, like, hey, if you've never developed a budget before, maybe start, doing that. Including like how much working capital do you need to build up, as a good reserve, how much debt, you need, line of credit availability, you need, those are the basics. But as I was, in other words, like, actually, it's shocking how many people don't actually do that are business owners, like establish a budget. I mean, that's like the equivalent of running your household off what's the debit card say that I have available, which shockingly a lot of people do that too, but that it's just not. You're leaving a lot on the table by doing that. But I think in preparation for today, kind of if you're beyond that, like, okay, Adam, I do a budget, all right, I'm on it, I got all that stuff, what else you got there? Go deeper in the well. I thought about, all right, if I was to figure what are the two most important things that somebody focus on getting dialed in 2024 by doing the analysis in 2023, that can make a massive difference in terms of cash flow and value of your company, it's to really get dialed in on two items. And we talked about them in previous webinars, but one is understanding how to calculate the profitability of a customer. So that you can truly objectively say, am I making money on this relationship or not? And if I'm not, what do I need to do to make it better? And if I'm making money, but customer A is not as profitable as customer B, all else being equal, then understanding why is that, and what, if anything, that I can do about it. I mean, that move alone, by knowing that and kind of making that part of your DNA, just it goes. That's not to say, hey, treat customers like they're numbers and whatever. I mean, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying, like, it gets you a little more laser like in terms of like, well, who do you need to be rolling out the red carpet for? Versus who am I currently rolling out the red carpet for? But it's like, why am I doing that? I'm paying them to roll out the red carpet for them. So that's number one. Number two is, in all of our businesses, I don't care what you're in, your top 1, 2, or 3 biggest expense is labor. So understanding the relationship between labor and gross profit. And it doesn't, and by labor, I mean like all labor, even if it's used in calculating gross profit, it would be, gross profit before labor, versus labor. So understanding those two relationships, because with labor, it's like, we've talked before about like everybody in the planet feels overwhelmed about something. And, there's been a good, I'm a big proponent of it too. It's like, there's been a good resurgence of people focused on mental health. And at the same time, it's just not showing up in the data, that people are busier than they were. So it's something else. And the only true, and what I can also tell you is that BGW, me coming into somebody's office and saying, hey, Adam, I'm overwhelmed. No, you're not. Data didn't prove it. That goes over about as well as it does at home. Yeah. I'm really mad. You have no right to be.
You want to see my to-do list?
Tried.
Yeah, I'll show you my to-do list.
I've only tried that like 100 times and had it fail 101, before I finally gave up on that approach. But the relationship between labor and gross profit is really your only data point, of what truly is going on. And that's one of those ratios where there is a theoretical limit, where it's like, okay, now I actually am kind of killing the people. But sort of like, if you guys follow, David Goggins at all, he's one of my favorite motivational guys. And, his kind of thing is, hey, when your mind's telling you that your body's ready to quit, that means you're only 20% done, I think the labor ratio is sort of like that. It's like, when I think that I'm at, the peak possible, that probably only is about not 20% like David Goggins said, but realistically probably more like 70% of what actually is possible. Therefore, striving for 80%, can make a massive difference. I mean, there's lots of other revenue per FTE. I mean, there's lots of ways to calculate this stuff, but it's like, put in context, even if you have a product, if you are not at $150,000 for full-time equivalent, you kind of got to question, like, what am I doing? Like, what is going on, here? And that's for most businesses. I mean, I don't know what it would be for like a McDonald's or something, but, for most businesses that we serve and shoemakers serve, that's a good, like, floor value. If you don't have a product, and it's all services, like me and Jack, we ought to be shooting for more like kind of a 175 number as a floor. Other than that, you just kind of question, what am I doing? But calculating the labor dollars relative to gross profit, it's the ultimate score. And if you're going to track one number to improve upon, to Jack's point about, hey, fix simple stuff, make commitment to improvement. It's really that one, because that is one that is entirely in your control. It's not in somebody else's control. It is 1000% in your control to do something with. And if it looks like it's declining over time, you are burying your freaking head in the sand in terms of you got underlying problems. You just don't know what they are yet. You haven't taken the time to uncover what they are.
So just humor me on this. If somebody is like, Adam, that is really interesting, but I don't have a clue as to how to calculate that. You want to do a little whiteboard right here, and then I'll put it up and you guys can see. But it's funny because we assume, oh gosh, everybody understands how to do that. Or people that are listening, oh, I guess everybody else knows how to do that, but I don't know how to do that. And so let's just keep it simple, and we can show it right here.
And while he's doing his calculations, I'll throw something else into that as well, which is, and you touched on it. Well, overall cost, and I'm going to use a word that I was okay using kind of before COVID, but now I don't like using, which is the word pivot. But because I think
Not
it's
that it was
overused.
overused.
It is overused, and that's why I don't like it. It's like, okay, and it's supposed to be bring enamorous feelings towards the person who said it, like we pivoted to do this, or we had to pivot and we were successful. So which is great. I'm not diminishing that, because yes, all of us have had to do that, but I'm talking about the there was an article, and I kept it. It was the Wall Street Journal from yesterday, and there was an article about return to office rules aren't filling cubicles, and that that the occupancy rate, or the people coming to actual work in the bigger cities, is still half of what it was in 2019.
Wow.
So you have that, are you paying people to come into the office? Are you paying them to work at home? Are they efficient? So, a lot of us had to take a leap of faith with the people that we allowed to work from home. And so, but I think that's also brought on efficiencies for all of us to be able, we had to pay the money to get our remote access, to the next level to be able to do that. And it's been successful, and I think it's been more efficient, but there's also downsides too, which is, all right, well, if I want something done and my assistant is not sitting outside of my office, then how do I get it to her? Well, it's going to have to be scanned and sent to her. I have to write a little more legibly, because the scan diminishes the print quality a little bit, which is very difficult. I have to use a pen instead of a pencil, little things like that, right? Again, the little annoyances. So when you were saying that about costs and looking at that, I was thinking about that article that you need to look and see, are you being efficient with your employees and how you're doing things, or you're doing it same as it was before, meaning as you were going through COVID, or are you back to doing it the way you were doing it before COVID, which may or may not be the best thing to do, but it's the easiest thing to do potentially. So sorry for that tangent, but
see if you guys can see this. There we go. All right. Sorry. I'm not too good with the going backwards. There we go. Gross profit over labor dollars. So $100 of gross profit over $50 of labor equals a 2.0, right? Yeah. So then you had gross profit GP labor over all labor. So you had 100 plus 25 over 75, assuming
the same
some
$50 as before. Yeah, I mean, that was just, the second one is just an example of, well, what if labor is part of how I calculate gross profit? Just to common size it, you want to add back in the labor and then use it again in the denominator to get an apples to apples comparison.
But the target is 2.0 or 1.75, I think is what you had said, right? In a service.
No, that was more on that's actually shockingly still not a bad number, but what I was referencing there was per full-time equivalent between $150,000 to $200,000 per full-time equivalent.
Okay. Of revenue.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. All right. Hopefully you guys are getting that. Any thoughts or questions? And while you guys are doing that, both of you guys, the two things that you guys talked about, which was, hey, do you know what your customers or your employees are thinking? Between that and understanding customer profitability, those were the two things. Now, we didn't go into we had our labor numbers, but in this turnaround that we had to do, those were the two things. And when I asked the board and I asked the management team of this insulating glass company, I said, well, what do your customers think? They hadn't tiered their customers, which was interesting. So they didn't know. That was a first. So we tiered them, looked at profitability by customer, but then we went to those customers and said, what do you think about these guys? Oh, we know what our customers think. They thought this was the dumbest exercise. Oh my, it was extremely enlightening. Extremely enlightening. But you can't fix stuff if you don't know that, there's a fire burning in the kitchen. You can't fix it. It's like, as simple as this stuff is, it's so overlooked because we have the tyranny of the urgent that is always crashing. It's always running. And it's like, oh, hey, before you know it, Thanksgiving will be here. And before you know it, Christmas will be here. And man, I'm telling you, it seems like before Thanksgiving is really the target you should be looking at, I think, for a lot of the stuff, because then people are starting to check out Thanksgiving, and then Christmas, the whole month of December is really tough. So before you kind of take your foot off the gas, be putting that, because that's only about 6 weeks away, not even. So.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because I was thinking, okay, it seems too early to have this particular conversation. Like, wait, no, it's October. So yeah, the time between Thanksgiving and Christmas is for most a dead period. Now, for transactional M&A lawyers like me, it's until the 31st of December, and it's, but actually the 15th of December, because everybody wants to get their stuff done to me before their kids come home from school, Christmas break, family comes into town, so that kind of thing. But one thing, as you were talking, I was thinking, okay, the psychology, some people are, and I've experienced this, are somewhat embarrassed or self-conscious about admitting that maybe they don't understand certain aspects of their financials. And I will tell you, there is no shame in that. I mean, no one can know everything. And so and I've had that, the sheepish conversation coming in. It's like, well, I think, and I don't want to seem like I'm stupid, even though I've been in business for a quarter of a century doing this, but something just doesn't seem right. And then in this particular instance, peeling away that, okay, another common conversation is, we're making a ton of revenue, we're tonning it, but at the end of the day, the money evaporates. Well, let's look at that. In this instance, it was two things. It was they were carrying too much inventory, and inventory that wasn't moving, but their supplier said, if you want the good stuff, you got to take the bad stuff too. And so there was opportunity to fix that. They were not, even though they were holding more inventory than they should have, it wasn't the amount of inventory they were holding previously. And so they had office or warehouse space that they were paying for, ventilating, paying insurance on, that it was not being used. And they thought, well, we're kind of stuck with that lease. I said, well, let's talk about renegotiating lease, subleasing. Are you paying for insurance coverage in this separate building when there's nothing in there? So let's look at modifying potentially your insurance to cover what is actually going on over there. And it's not that you're storing millions of dollars of stuff in there that needs to be insured. So stuff like that. And it's just, just again, take the time to look inward, and don't be embarrassed to ask the questions of your CPAs and others, because they're not dumb questions. What would be dumb is that if there was an opportunity to continue to trim those expenses in ways that maybe you hadn't thought of, what would be dumb is not to ask that question.
Yeah. And if those providers make you feel stupid, you might want to find a different provider, because we have that all the time. And we're like, we will not make you feel stupid because we don't know your business. And, our job is to help kind of speak English. And it's funny because when we started this 178 weeks ago, we got to do a 200 week anniversary in 6 months, man, I think. But when we started that, everybody else was speaking gobbledygook. And we were really trying to keep it real because we're business owners too, So anyway, hopefully this is helping. The gallery is extremely quiet today. There's got to be some stuff that you guys are thinking about. Also, be buttoning up your stuff and starting to have, if you haven't had conversations with your CPA on tax planning, do it sooner rather than later, because everybody has a big rush at the end of the year, and try to be having conversations, proactive, and just have your stuff kind of together. Like, have your thoughts, have your worries, have your concerns together, and give your CPA a little heads up so that they can research it and be prepared, because not everybody can speak off the cuff like Adam can. So that really does help. It's a two-way street. Help them help you. So anything you'd add on that one?
Amen.
And
One
I
of the
would also
biggest
say,
things that we struggle with, quite frankly, is just, communication, right? We have people that struggle, that are in our profession, that struggle to communicate. It's not necessarily their top skill, but it's a two-way street. You can't do a dump and run on your CPA and expect that you're going to have a really good outcome. You have to have dialogue, and you have to be available and responsive when needed as well. So going back to the Vince Lombardi, this is a football, simplicity. It's the simple stuff that trips us up. It really is. It's not the complicated esoteric stuff. It's the simple stuff that trips us up. And if we just block and tackle on that, it'll make it so much better, and not a dread zone. So,
and I was going to say, there's a link to your personal stuff as well. And what I see, until someone kind of comes to realization or does some looking at their own personal estate planning stuff, and I'm not trying to upsell anyone on anything, but just sharing what happens occasionally, which is your estate planning evolves over the course of time, either purposefully, because you're doing certain allocations, you require certain property or assets, or organically, your kids are no longer minors. And so now you have to deal with certain issues, or you had a certain trust established, and then there were points where they would get the money at age 20, 25, whatever it is. And so that continues to evolve. But then in your business, you a lot of times have a static document, which is an operating agreement or a shareholders agreement, that is treating that asset, your asset, as an owner in that business, whether it's shares or membership interests, a certain way. And a lot of people tend to forget that there is, I don't want to say estate planning, but there is succession planning in these documents, purposefully in there, that there is a presumption, or a bad presumption, that estate planning documents are going to override what is in this operating agreement that was drafted, or shareholders agreement that was drafted 15 years ago. And you should not, while you should not use a business agreement like an operating agreement, a shareholders agreement, or a buy-sell agreement for the mechanism for your estate planning, the reverse is true. You shouldn't assume that your estate planning is going to properly address things that should be addressed in a shareholders agreement or an operating agreement. Maybe a little bit easier if it's interfamily issue, but when you start having outsiders to each other, then that becomes an issue. And so I would suggest that, you kind of, at the end of the year, beginning of the following year, there's just a couple things that you should be doing, which is obviously looking at numbers, thinking about the future, doing pro formas, looking at things like your insurance to cover the buy sell that's in your operating agreement or shareholders agreement. Another anomaly that happens is that when you draft this static document, the operating agreement or shareholders agreement, there may be a formula in there that says that, okay, we're going to get insurance that is going to cover 80% of the cost of buying that deceased partner out. Well, the value of the business increases over the course of time. You have an insurance policy that is static, potentially, because you buy it and it's like, okay, it's $1.2 million, let's say, which may have covered 80%. But as time goes on, and if all things are going well in your business, the value of the business is going to increase. So that percentage value is going to increase. Now, all of a sudden, now you've only funded 75%. You've only funded 65%. So that's just another thing that you should be doing, is looking at those obligations and your literally your insurance policies to cover those obligations, which oftentimes gets missed at the end of the year, beginning of next year, when you're kind of reassessing the value of the company.
You know, there's one other thing that you sparked this idea, and it was from a conversation I had with a business owner. They structured up, I think 10 years ago, 6 years ago, can't remember. But nonetheless, they were structured as an S corp, not as an LLC being taxed as an S corp. Well, it's in conflict with some of their long-term goals. You know, so they like being taxed as an S corp, but they don't have the flexibility because they weren't established as an LLC, and they have operations in 2 different states. One state is extremely tax friendly, and the other state is not as much. And they're 50-50 partners. What do? Well, now's a good time in 2023 to get the table set before you go into 2024, if you're going to make those kind of changes. And a lot of times we find that they're structured incorrectly as a C corp or an S corp or an LLC. You have more flexibility as an LLC, but depending on what they're wanting to do long term. And a lot of times what they decide they want to do now versus when they launched this business on a wing and a prayer are different. So it's just another one of those things that's worth asking your professional, hey, are we structured appropriately for what I want to do with this thing long term? It's an important question. So just another nugget. Anything else from the gallery? Go ahead.
Here's another one too. I feel like we're like, instead of telling you what you should be doing, I'm going to tell you what you should not be doing here, which is, and 2 other things I see since we're talking about operating agreements and shareholders agreements that come to mind, which is, so started a business 20 years ago. It was just you brought on some partners. Okay. Life goes on. You do what you need to do. You start filing partnership returns, but never look back to that operating agreement. That was a single member operating agreement that now you have 2 partners. And then compound that with, all right, so 20 years ago, 10 years ago, turned into a partnership. 5 years ago, you had a wonderful idea to turn it into, to do an S corp election at the beginning of the subsequent year. And now you have an operating agreement that in the worst case scenario says it's a sole proprietorship, single member. Next worst thing is that it says it's partnership, and you know that can create problems. Now, I have not seen an S corp election busted up because the documentation was incorrect, but that was only because they were filing and they were paying as an S corp and they were allocating properly. But I mean, you have the governance document that says you are supposed to be a partnership, and it has all that, the treasury regulations in there instead of the S corp, which is a much simpler operating agreement, because it basically says, well, you're an S corp, you got to distribute according to the percentages, and you can't do it otherwise, or else you're in violation of it. So while you're looking at your operating agreement to make sure that it says what you want it to say for estate planning purposes and succession planning purposes, think about how you're treated, your tax treatment is, and is that reflected correctly in your governance document. So free I was going to say legal advice, but we don't do that, so it's free guidance that hopefully will keep you off the IRS hit list. So
free musings by a lawyer. Anything you'd add, Adam?
Nah, man, I think we got the bases. I think we got the bases covered. Make 2024 your year to get your crap together. Stop using the pandemic as an excuse.
You know,
Obama didn't ruin the economy. I mean, like, it's a long way of saying the past is long enough to go, man. Let's move on and get in the future.
Yeah. You have an ebook coming out though, don't you?
Yeah.
So give us a little primer on that.
Yeah. So we're, at BGW and Schumacher, although they're much larger in a crazy partnership, it's probably harder for Jack to practice it. We strongly believe in governance and metrics and accountability structures and all sorts of good stuff like that. So, a lot of people are like, it's all interesting stuff, but what's that really mean for me? What it means for you is that if you're good at that, I think you notice two things. If you think about, well, what are the symptoms of bad governance? Like for me personally, as a business owner, like what are the symptoms of bad governance? One is I'm just frustrated and generally running around in a state of pissed offery. And then secondly, I'm not making as much money as I think that I should be making, because like I may be okay, but I know that I could be doing better. So I'm upset, and generally like, God, if all these bozos would just do what I told them to do, and then secondly, I just feel like I'm not making as much as I should make. And if you're really committed to implementing a kind of a proper, governance / accountability system in your company, you can improve those two items. And the first thing you'll notice, like it always precedes the money. What you will notice first is you feel better, because people, like, stuff is starting to happen without you having to be standing over it all the time. Like all of a sudden people understand how to do their jobs and they're actually doing them without having to have like the conversation of, Gary, I thought you would have, like, you don't have to do those anymore. And then secondly, you start making more money. So the ebook kind of came out of, we're doing a seminar on that topic coming up here in November. But the ebook topic was all around, if you kind of look at what are the ways that you can absolutely tank the value of your business. And it's funny, there happened to be 7 of them. So it was a play on the 7 deadly sins, to say, well, what are the 7 deadly sins of value destruction in a business, which we've covered on this webinar before. And we just turned it into an ebook to give a little bit more readable, a little bit more detail in terms of each one of those items. But, kind of the biggest ones we actually talked about, here on this webinar, which are like today, one of them is, crap ass financial records. Like if you can't, like, people are like, I'll deal with that at some point in the future, blah, blah, it's not that big of a deal. I know how the business is doing. It's fine. Man, when you're ready to go to sell, if you can't prove it, Jack ain't going to believe it as your representation. And, it doesn't matter what your buddy at the country club said in terms of the multiple of earnings that he got. I got a 10. First off, that's not even the same business as you, Jack. But secondly, you can't produce accurate financial records. And by accurate, I mean you can explain everything and it generally conforms to what you should be doing in your industry. You're like an automatic 3 multiple. Like you'll go no higher than that. Like maybe on a good day, you'll get a 4 or 5, but guess what? That extra 2 totally going to be contingent. And what happens when you got a contingency, Jack? You better count on you're never going to earn it, because the other guy is going to figure out a way to stick it to you. So that's number one. And then, number 2 is, kind of no process, no management team, what's your reporting structure? Everybody reports to me. I make all the decisions around here. I trust no one. Okay, well, like that really sounds like a turnkey business now, doesn't it, Mr. Fry?
How low can I take that multiple on that one?
I mean, I have great financial records, but it's because I do them. well, now great job. You're not a 3, but you're now a 4, and you're going to be part of the deal. You're not retiring. You're part of the deal. So, it's kind of those two things are kind of the top two. That if you commit to those, you can make some they're not easy, but they're super simple to fix. And if you just think about it, it's like, okay, look, if I spent $50 extra $1,000 on accounting, and I spent $50,000 this next year training and developing my management team, that's $100,000 investment. Well, that sucks. I mean, I didn't wake up in the morning looking to spend that money, but if it created, and I guarantee that it would, in just about every business that's over $2 million in revenue, if it created $300,000 in additional EBITDA, not only did it pay for itself, because the basic math, Gary, 300, even Jack can do this math. 300 minus 100 is still 200 to the good. A, and then B, if you went from a 3 multiple to a 5 multiple, your 300 times 5 is 1.5 additional value, plus the value you already had went up almost double. Like if you don't have the cash, borrow the money to do that, or if you do have the cash, what are you waiting on?
Yeah.
So that's it. Tirade done.
Well, so when will that ebook be available? Because I think it'd be worth sharing. It might be even worth doing a deeper dive again, even though we've done it before.
We'll find out in about an hour, but I suspect the next day or two.
All right, cool. So maybe upcoming would be good, especially as we're thinking about this kind of finishing strong the fourth quarter. We interviewed Renee Bregelet, who was the CEO of Victory Bolt and Specialty, yesterday on the podcast, and her story is really amazing. Oh my gosh. But one of the things that she said before they sold, they had decided she had really good outside counsel, and they were growing extremely rapidly for a long period of time. And this outside counsel said, you really need to have what she calls certified financial statements, where they were verified ability to be, whether it's reviewed financial statements but just buttoned up. She had no intentions of selling whatsoever. And I think at times maybe she regrets it a little bit, but somebody kept banging on her door. She threw out an astronomical number, thinking, no way would they do it. And they took it. And they took it largely because of those certified, as she says, certified financial statements. They were able to close in like less than 6 months. And she said, I mean, that's an arduous process. I mean, you want to talk about stress. It's a very stressful, emotional, and like taxing time, because you are like, everything is being sifted and sorted through on your financials, everything. And I mean, it's extremely invasive. And we had one client that went through that, and his stuff was buttoned up, but it was so emotionally taxing. He ended up going to the hospital because he was just like, it just fried him out. And he's doing well now, but it took its toll physically and emotionally on him. So if that's ever in the cards, or if you're thinking about it, whether even if it's an internal sale, get that stuff buttoned up. It will save you a bunch of help and headache in the future. So,
and I would say that's why we're having this conversation now too, because take what you just said and add the pressures of the holidays and everything else. So even if it's not in anticipation of a sale or some other big event, and it's just going into next year, now is the time to do it. We're all busy. We're all stretched very thin. I shouldn't say all. There's a big presumption. I know many people that are, including myself, stretched thin in various ways. And so, to keep that on the back burner is an easy thing to do, and you just got to allocate the time. one of the things I was thinking about also, as you guys were saying, okay, how the internal workings of an office, and having your act together as and finishing strong as a business, something you might consider is helping your employees finish strong personally. And what I mean by that is, do you have a friend that would be willing to, no strings attached, no promises, other than that person promising they're not going to try to sell your employees on anything other than to come in and give them advice or guidance on financial planning? I mean, I see, some of our younger people that, they just don't know. They haven't had the guidance, or they haven't had the role models with parents that were financially responsible, or they have friends that were financially irresponsible when they were in college. And so they just don't have that discipline and would appreciate it. But they're not going to ask you. They're not going to ask you to be their financial advisor. Do you think, how much of my salary that you're giving to me should I put aside? And how many credit cards is okay to have? Well, that's a personal decision, but I hear about all these other these investment vehicles and what should I be doing? And so, just providing some professional services to come in and just have this, again, no strings attached, no expectations, no promises, but just to have that conversation, if nothing else, to become more familiar with, okay, what is this S&P 500? What are, I've heard that there are these, they call generational funds that are geared towards your year of retirement. And so, and if you're not familiar with it, it will take your year of retirement and it'll adjust your risk tolerance, and obviously more risky when you're younger, more conservative when you are getting older, and adjust it over, whatever the set period of time is. So things like that, I think, are important, because obviously if you have happy employees that are not stressed out about things like that, then they will perform better in your shops. And that is not a Jack theory. That is a proven theory.
Yeah, that's good. Well, guys, we're hitting the noon hour coming up here. We have a monthly all hands meeting, and why they chose to start it at 11:30 without the two of us. Maybe they wanted us to not be there.
And that's all about training people, scalable process. Hey man, this place can run without us, evidently.
But they're having lunch and we're not. So that's probably the bigger thing. Thank you guys for joining us. Next week is week 179. And here's a little trivia question for you to think about. Does anybody know how WD-40, what it was originally used for? Because at the beginning of this, Jack was talking about the annoying squeaky hinge that became therapy for his neighbor, but it was annoying the crap out of Jack. So do you know, Jack? Do you know?
I don't, but I'm very interested. And I don't know, that sounds like a coffee card giveaway. If someone can answer it in the next 10 seconds. No cheating.
So if anybody knows, hit us in the chat in the next 15 seconds without Googling it. I'm counting. We're five seconds into it. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That's actually a hint. It was used to spray down Apollo spacecrafts so that water wouldn't join there. So I'm going to hit I'm putting it in the chat, but it's an interesting thing, I think. So
it was a vapor barrier.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And so it was the 40th. They had failed 39 times on 39 different formulations, and the 40th one. So that's why it was called WD-40. Isn't that interesting?
Wow. Okay, I think you win the Cliff Clavin Award for today. So
well, we competed against WD-40 when I was consulting with a company called Blaster, who bought Liquid Wrench, which is here in Charlotte, the Blumenthal family. And WD-40 is just a marketing machine. They don't even produce their own stuff. It's just amazing to me. But that was, yeah, the little thing that I put in the chat has a little bit of that background, and you could Google it, but it's pretty cool. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for humoring us. Hopefully we brought some value and a little smile to your face. We'll see you next week. And if you were late getting on here, we'll put it up on the BGW CPA YouTube channel later on today. Thank you,
Thank
Jack.
you.
See y'all.
All right,
Bye-bye.
see you guys.